Okay, today I'm going to talk about the host-link editing. Uh,诶，我觉得是发这个 PPT First, I'm going to talk about some kind of different articles that when you need to face editing. The first one is the accident and disaster stories. You need to focus on the following questions, such as who was involved, what happened, when, where, why, how did it happen, and you need to be sure that the description of what happened doesn't assume or imply anyone's guilt. And the next one is the business stories. In the business stories, the most interesting is focus on the people rather than the things. And you need to pay attention to the numbers in the business stories. That will be important. And the editors should have at least an elementary knowledge of business terms, or otherwise you cannot know what's the correct things when you are editing. The next one is the chronological stories. And using the chronological approach when the subject of an interview relates to a completed series of events. And it's also used when reporting a detailed event. You should start it with a list about the story and then transition to the chronological account, concluding perhaps with a dramatic ending or continuing in the inverted pyramid style. And the next one is the court stories. You need to make sure the reporting does not incriminate anyone not yet convicted in the court. It's the most important when you're editing the court stories. You need to consider the ethics of reporting names and address of the victims. Some of them may refuse to do that. And the crime stories. You need to avoid printing confessions until admitted into the court as evidence. You cannot just choose what you want and put it on it. It needs to be admitted. And also maybe the names, the address, and the photos of the victims may be considered used if they agree with it. You also need to avoid saying a victim was unharmed if he or she was involved in a psychologically harming situation such as a kidnapping or an attempted rape. And the next one is the speech stories. When you do the speech stories, there will be many things that want the speaker that he or she may talk a lot. You shouldn't try to include everything that was said because there will be too many. And the what he or she said will be the most important part in the speech story. And you need to typically follow an inverted pyramid style and also follows the order of who said what in the speech stories. Now I'm going to talk about some pieces. The advanced pieces is often but not always originate from a press release, and they are often written as personality profiles of a key person or group. You shouldn't save the calendar items just for the postmortems. When you analyze pieces, you should alert the copy desk chief if you ever mistakenly given an analyzed piece to the brief. The brief means a small 2 or 3 inch stories appears in a digest. You shouldn't remove the byline from an analyzed pieces unless it has a byline logo with it, like those you see with regular contributing commentators. Also, the headline should reflect the opinion taken in the story, so it does not have to be objective. About the celebrity news, it's always newsworthy, and but the celebrities have less protection than an average person when he or she wants to sue the newspaper that report what happened to them, but also they have a right to endorse or not endorse products and causes of their own choosing without advertisers apporting their names, voice, or image without permission. Focus pieces is used primarily for writing and analyze for an issues, but it's adapted to other kinds of features too. The nut graph is the right after the feature lead, and the person that you use in the focus pieces will need to be very clear about the person who is being quoted. And the columns. It depends upon the writer being more personal in style and in information, and it often contains elements of a review, so it's important for legal purpose to be aware of false statements about matters of fact as opposed to mere negative opinion. One of the places where the news media most often pass and own famous misquotations or misinformation is always in the columns. Obituaries. Both the standard and feature of it should be distinguished from a paid funeral notice. And in the obituaries, you need to include the following information, such as the address, the cause of death, the contesting titles and the date, the flowers if their family wants that, and some negative information and some semantics. Now comes to the question. The first one is, which following statement is wrong? Yeah, that's A. Because in the business story is the most interesting when focused on the people rather than the things. And the second question, which of the following statement is true? Yeah, that's B. That's correct. Because especially you need to pay attention that the headline should reflect the opinion taken in the story, so it does not have to be objective. The answer C is wrong. And the question 3 is, which is not asked in the obituaries? Yeah, the sense of death. That should not be included. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Before we go, you can come up. Before we proceed with the next one, I just want to make a few comments. It's fine. Come up. I've got you right here, and I can. Okay. So once I'm done with the comments, you're ready to go. Okay. The comments I wanted to make primarily about leads. One thing I've noticed is that These writers classify leads a little bit differently than some other textbook writers, including me. And so I guess the main thing I want to say is if I say something about leads in your final exam, I'm really talking about what I believe in what I teach in the crash course. For example, he said specifically that in a speech story you should follow the he said, who said what format. And I'm saying just the opposite of that. I'm saying say what he said and then say who said it. Because I think the most important part is what they said. And so my speech interview lead says, we should bomb the North Koreans, said President Trump, whatever. I'm not, he didn't actually say that. But anyway, so I'm saying that it's better to put the content, the what, and then the who. I think that's best practices, and that's what, if it's on the final exam, it's based on my opinion. I also noticed, at least according to the presentations, like perhaps today, I don't know, it seems that the checkbook, the textbook suggests that a delayed identification is delaying the name. And a textbook that I based mine on in that regard was a very popular textbook by a guy whose last name was Huff, but I don't remember his first name. And to him, there are two types of, I teach in my crash course is based on his book, that a blind lead is a lead that does not give the person's name but describes who they are. So it might say the American president, but it doesn't say Donald Trump, for example. It describes who said something or who did something. And that's a blind lead. It does not tell you the name of the person. It gives you a description of it. And in an accident story, it might be a description, for example, a driver who was determined to be to have too much alcohol in his system. That might be the reference on your lead, might be something describing him, not his name. And then on paragraph 2, you might give his name. And so that would be called, by Huff's his teaching, and what I've adopted in my textbook, that's a blind lead. That's not a delayed identification lead. That's a blind lead. And by Huff's version and thus my textbook, if you're delaying, if you're using the name and delaying the description and telling who that person is, then that's a delayed identification. So identification to Huff was the description of who this person was, not the name, but the description of them. And so a blind lead has the description and no name, and a delayed identification has a name and no description. And I'm getting the impression anyway, I haven't reread it myself to remind myself, but it seems like from what the other presenters of this particular chapter have said, that these writers have it flipped around. But maybe you can tell me I'm wrong. I don't know. And of course, a what lead, something else that came out with the headline presentations that might be included in today's. They do call a what lead any lead that emphasizes what happened. It's not based on how it's written, it's based on, is that the main thing it's covering? Whereas in my book, what I'm trying to teach you with the leads and the way I name my leads with the 5 W's, related leads, is that you can manipulate your wording in a way to put the whammy to the front of the lead. So I'm classifying mine, if it's a what lead, I'm classifying it that way because the what element starts the sentence. A forest fire in California would be, that would be a what. Anyway, so what is happening, or a fire burning out of control in Southern California, that's starting with what. A few inches from freedom is a where. Just after saying he wanted peace, so-and-so did something or other. That's when did he do it, right? Just a few seconds after saying he wanted peace. So my classifications for those leads that deal with 5 W's are what are you putting to the front of the sentence? And because I'm trying to teach you very specifically that you can put anything to the front of the sentence if you want to. There's ways of wording it so you can put anything to the front. So in that sense, that's also going to disagree with the textbook, this textbook, I'm sure, that they're saying that a what lead is anything that emphasizes what, no matter where it is in the sentence. And I'm saying, no, that's not the way I define it. So again, on a final exam, go by what I say. But acknowledge, understand that, guess what, we don't all have to agree with each other. But in our final exam, do it by the crash course. Okay. So you're hot. You're ready to go.
Hello everyone, my name is Zhou Sujiayue. Today is my turn to give you a presentation, and my topic is writing headlines. Let's first look at the learning structure. I will discuss 4 points. The first one, getting people to read, and the second one, copy editors as the most read editors. The third, the headline writing process, and the last is how to write a headline. An axiom of the media industry is to persuade people to read newspapers and magazines, listen to radio, watch televisions, and surf the web. And first, you should draw people's attention. In this chapter, we will review the importance of display type, includes headlines, titles, captions, and blurbs. These are all means of drawing audience. Then the copy editors are the most read editors. The copy editor is a valuable member of staff. The first task of a copy editor is to correct and refine copy, and the second task is to write a headline. And features of a good headline usually contain 6 points. The first one attracts the reader's attention, which is also the most important. And then summarize the story, helps the readers index the content of the page, depicts the mood of the story, helps set the tone of the newspaper, and the last point is provides adequate typographic relief. However, one simple truth is that the average reader does not read the average newspaper story. We should accept this as a newspaper life. One way to solve this problem is to improve headlines, because headlines can tell stories in many ways, and good headlines attract readers to the story. Headline writing process involves 2 critical steps. The first step is select which details to use, and the second is to phrase them properly with the space available. The copy editor exercises editorial judgment in completing the first step in the process. They most use the keyword method. In its short form, that is, this involves answering the question who does what. And the most good headline contains a subject and a predicate, and usually a direct object. For example, tornado strikes Jonesboro. This is a common headline, but we can make it more profit. Synonyms can be used to shorten the phrase. So we can turn the former headline into the new version. Twister rives Jonesboro. We use more concise and clear verb, and the essence of headline writing is in simplified form. Then we must understand headline orders. Traditionally, the instructions for headline are written as 3 numbers separated by hyphens. For example, 1, 22, 24, 3. The first number is the number of columns that a headline will cover, and the second number is the point size of the headline. The third number is the number of lines. So the example 1, 24, 3 means 1 column wide, 24 points type, and 3 lines long. Visualizing the size is maybe hard at first, but just remember 72 points equal an inch. Copy editors have various terms for different kinds of headlines. Here are 4 terms you should know. First one, main head. The main head includes the main point and typically have between 1 and 3 or 4 lines. And next one, set deck. Set deck adds additional details or a different angle beyond what's said in the main head. However, it is not merely a second line of the main head. It is a sentence of its own and will be either half the point size of the main head or the next larger standard point size above half. The next one is hammer. Hammer is a label head which is above a main head. It is usually 1, 2, 3 words long. And the last one is kicker. A kicker is also a label head, but of up to about 5 words. Above a main head, it is half the point size of the main head and in lighter type. In order to make my statement clearer, I create this graph, and you can see the relationships between these 4 terms. For example, this is a hammer, and the main head beneath the hammer, and a second deck beneath the main one. And this is a kicker, and the main head under the kicker, and a second deck beneath the main head. There are a few headline conventions you must be familiar. Headline mechanics cover 4 categories, includes punctuation, grammar, line breaks, and abbreviations. Because the time is so limited, so I will show you the reading material at the end of my PowerPoint. The last part is how to write the headline. First, you should start by writing your ideal head for the story, and then try to fit it into the space you have. Finally, if you want to make it more perfect, simply pick synonyms as we have discussed before. Also, it is useful to join down the keywords from the story and then build the headline around these keywords. Here are some tips on writing informative headlines, which means writing headlines that tell. First, you should get in the keywords and be as specific as possible. And remember to be accurate. Match the tone of the story. Don't editorialize. Be conversational and clear. And finally, don't over-abbreviate. To the advice above, let's add more tips on how to write headlines that smell. First, you should beware of typos and avoid vague headlines. Don't rehash old news. Don't overstate. Don't command the reader. Avoid sensationalizing and don't miss the point. A good headline tells a story, but a great headline tells it and sells it. Here are some techniques to make a headline sell a story by explaining it in a way that is striking. The first one, alliteration. It is a repetition of sounds and should be natural and make sense. And the rhymes sometimes can work. For example, dollars for scholars. And then balance and contrast. The example, they bring new life to old towns. The word new and old are a pair of contrast. And puns is the most often used triggers, and it must be appropriate to the mood and content. For example, clockmaker puts heart into tickers. And the last one is speak the language of the story. That means you should think of words associated with the story. Finally, let's discuss what to do if you are stuck. Because every headline writer has a mental block at one time or another. If you are stuck, you can look for synonyms for each individual word. And you can also look at the suggested head from the wire surface. You can also ask other editors for help or make a story more focused. That means you can turn a quote to the head. And the last idea is sneaky. which means you can steal the great lead for your head, but this must be used as the last resort. And these 4 pictures are the reading materials. You can read it after class. And questions 1. What does 236.5 mean? A. 2 lines long, 36-point type, 5 columns wide. B. 2 columns wide, 36-point type, 5 lines long. C. 2 columns wide, 36 lines long, 5-point type. The answer is boy. And question 2. What should you do if you are stuck? Choose one or more selections. A. Look for synonyms for each individual word. B. Ask another editor for help. C. Steal a great lead at once. D. Look at the suggested head from the writer surface. The answer is A, B, and D because steal a great lead should be the last resort. And this is my reference. Thank you for listening.
Okay, just a few comments also on this one. Let me look at my notes here real quick. Headline writing, first off, you need to know that headline writing, if you haven't noticed in your critique sheet, is worth 25% of your grade for your design assignments. Understand that, 25% of your grade is your headlines. So what am I going to be looking for? I'm going to be looking for grammar. So if you make good grammar any place, if you screw up the editing of the story, that's one thing. If you screw up the grammar for your headline, that's something else. You need to maybe get some help, get some backup if you need to, have people at your headlines, whatever you have to do to make sure your headlines are grammatically correct. Make sure they are following the sort of things that we're talking about here. I did post, I've talked about headline writing myself in the past. On Tuesday, I felt a particularly good student presentation on headline writing, and so I posted that on Moodle for you to listen to. I made a few comments when he was done also to again reemphasize important aspects of headline writing. So just be very aware that's 25% of your grade. You need to represent your story well. You're going to get, if it's grammatically correct and it does a good job of summarizing your story, you're going to get most of those points. As in this presentation, it's talked about great headlines. I would not worry too much about great headlines because that is so, especially for somebody whose English is not their first language, you may get yourself in trouble trying to use alliteration or puns or what else did she talk about? Alliteration, puns, rhymes, contrast. You might be able to use some of those concepts to make a great headline, but I even find those things hard to do myself. And so I very rarely write a great headline by that definition. However, I will say that some of my colleagues have risen very rapidly in the editing field because they're good headline writers. And they did do these things. They did use alliteration. They did use puns. They did use rhymes. They did use contrast on a regular basis while I was writing summary headlines. And they moved up very quickly in the profession based only on their headline writing because they would win awards with their headline writing because nobody gives you an award for a summary headline. You won't get an award for a summary headline. You will get an award for using one of these other techniques, alliteration, puns, rhymes, whatever. And so he was good at that, and he moved up very quickly in the profession. So they're a good thing to pursue, to think about. I'm not really going to expect to see you write great headlines, but I do want you to represent the story well in summary form of what is the story about. and find the most important thing in your story that you should be emphasizing. Just like we talked about with leads, that's true also for headlines. You need to figure out how to summarize the story in a few words. I will judge by the sizing of your headlines. Have you been able to get a big headline at the top of the page? Do you have different size of headlines depending on importance and position on the page, stuff like that. The things that are covered in the critique sheet, by the way. So be very aware in the critique sheet of what things I'm talking about when it comes to headlines, because that's what I'll be looking for as you write headlines. He was talking about I said this in my lecture on Monday, but do go look at a thesaurus. As I showed you on Monday, dictionary.com has a thesaurus. I think they changed it a little bit, because I pointed out, because I didn't notice at first, that with some words that have both a verb form and a noun form, they have two different tabs. You click on one tab for nouns and one tab for verbs. I would suggest you make use of that thesaurus, that online thesaurus. You need them for, especially when you're trying to cram more information into your headline in as short a space as you can, so that you can get your size up, the size of your headline up. That's really important. A couple of other things, the coding, the 124.3 and the 1-24-3, I would say that's used very little in the world anymore because of desktop publishing. If anybody's going to use it, it'd be a newspaper big enough to have a design editor to design all the pages. And I would say in America, there were, at least when I left America, more than 10,000 newspapers in America. The number of newspapers that could afford to have a design editor was probably no more than 200. And so 200 versus 9,800, and actually it was more than 10,000. So basically it's 200 versus 10,000. 200 have a design editor that might tell the copy editors what to do, and the rest, the copy editor is designing it himself. And so in most American newspapers, the copy editor is the design editor of his own pages. And so there's nobody to tell him, oh, write a one-column, 24-point, three-deck or three-line headline here. And in fact, it actually is, I would rather teach principles than to dictate exactly that, because it is so hard to write some headlines anyway, especially one-column headlines. But any size headline, you'll have challenges fitting what you want to say into the space allowed. And so if you are the copy editor and you're just given the page, you have this page, you have these ads on it, put in these stories, then you have the freedom, as you're doing headlines, as I did on Monday, when I get to a one-column headline or a sub-headline, I can decide, do I want 3 lines or 4 lines? So that gives me some freedom how many words I can have with that headline, depending. So I'm thinking, what do I want to say? And I decide whether to have 3 or 4 lines if it's a one-column headline, or 2 to 3 lines if it's a 2-column headline, or 1 or 2 lines if it's a 3 or 4-column headline. So I get to make some decisions on my own that make my headline writing a lot easier. And also sizes. If they say it has to be 24-point and you can't make it fit, well, you can knock it down to 22-point, 20-point, especially if it's towards the bottom of the page. On the other hand, on the top of the page, they might say make it one-column headline 30-point. Well, that's more challenging, a lot more challenging to make a one-column headline 30-point. So can you do it? Hopefully you can. Use your thesaurus and try to come up with wording that will allow you to go 30-point. but you will find it challenging. If they said to go more than 30 point, lots of luck with that. One column is not wide enough to go much higher than 30 point. So having somebody dictate to you, I want it 24 point, you're going to do it 24 point, is rather oppressive. So it really is much more practical to give you a page and tell you to design the page. In our newspaper, when I first got there, we did have a design editor, but all he did was front pages. He didn't do other pages. We had 4 sections of the newspaper, so he did 4 front pages. He may have also done the editorial page, which is a full page. I don't think he ever touched any other pages except those. Maybe a special section, something like that. But he basically, his job was to design 4 pages that night. And then in that case, we did have to do what he told us to do, as close as we could to it. So that whole concept of a 1-24-3 is probably fading away, but you might run into it. Another thing that I think is fading away a little bit is she was talking about line breaks, but didn't really explain it very well, because she did give you a page that talked about line breaking. In breaking your headlines, for example, I broke the rule myself. Let me, in the slideshow, and tell you where I broke the rule, the general rule of let me bring that up so I can give you an example. Okay, so I probably broke it more than once. See this headline right, this sub-headline here? One of the break of the rule is you do not separate an infinitive verb to resurrect. That's a break of the, you don't break there. But that's really hard to say what I want to say and not break them and keep them lined up. Remember my rule, but I think it's a more important rule, is to stay within 3 characters, all 3 lines being within 3 characters of each other. That, I think, is a more important rule than where you break, like here. Instead of pushing this over to the next one, and now suddenly this one's too long, this is too short. And so, to me, the rules about where to break a line are kind of low on my totem pole, so to speak, in my list of priorities. That's at the bottom of the list. If I can avoid breaking it someplace like that, I will avoid it. I know the rule. But it is not as important as filling the lines, and it's not as important as writing a good headline. The content of the headline is more important than where you break lines at, is my opinion. And so, but that's what they're talking about, just so you understand. That's when they talk about breaking lines, that's the sort of rule they're talking about, is don't break in the middle of an infinitive verb or stuff like that. Be aware of it. There may be people who will yell at you if you break that rule. I think those editors are kind of over the hill. I'm saying that as almost a 70-year-old. But I think those who get all upset about where you break a headline as being a high priority compared to the appearance of lining, getting the lines approximately the same, and more importantly, the content of what you're trying to say in your headline are really mixed up in their priorities. Let me put it that way. Let me see whether there's anything else I want to say. I think those I think were the main things I wanted to touch on with headlines. By the way, I'm looking at this headline, and I'm agreeing now that maybe it is I could probably tighten this headline here up. There seems to be more line spacing than it needs. But now that I'm looking at it, I would say that it is too close to the text, because you should look at it in theory anyway. Again, this is more theory than sometimes reality. It's not too close in the actual amount of space, but typically you should look at a headline as if it had a descender. It just so happens in this headline there are no descenders. If there were a descender, it would be too close for sure, because the descender would be touching the text. But there is no descender. And so you can kind of get away with being that close to the text, but you should kind of look at your text and ask, in fact, I had this higher and I brought it down. Anyway, it's questionable. It's not, it's close, nowhere close to touching the text, which is definitely a violation. But if there were a descender, it would be. There is no descender though. So, yeah, it is one of those things you consider is again how tight things are, whether they're too close to the text, the headline too close to the text, headline too close to the subheadline, or too high, too close to the caption. You're trying to balance it out with the space you have and let it breathe. So I could question this also, but technically it's not too close, but it definitely would be if it had a descender, for sure. Okay, I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to give you the rest.